Imagine that every day for years, from ninth grade through 12th grade, you get up every morning and train for a track event. You run sprints, you run long distance, you lift weights, you go to the weight room, you're running the 100, 200-yard dash, you try to build up your thighs, you make your high school track team, you compete against other high schools, you make the state finals, you're hoping for a medal, and when you get to the state finals and you come to the starting line, you look to your left and you see a person who looks like a biological male. Is this fair? This is the topic today of Great Stories in Bioethics, my personal YouTube channel. It's a bioethics issue because I know that pediatricians and doctors in adolescent medicine have thought about this. They've thought about the position taken by the American Academy of Pediatrics. They question whether doctors should be involved so easily in sex reassignment surgery, especially for men who want to compete against female athletes. So a couple of cases really started this controversy. 2017 in Connecticut, a person named Andraya Yearwood. His father was a fullback, either at Penn or Penn State, and Andraya looked a lot like the father. The very first time he decided to compete as a woman in the 100 and 200-yard dash, she won the state championship. Why did this happen? Because Connecticut allowed a student to compete in the gender in which he psychologically identified, even if he had never taken puberty blockers or hormone therapy or sex reassignment surgery, just because he decided he presented and felt attracted as a female. And this was a highly controversial event. A few years later, there was an even more controversial case of Leah Thomas, a University of Pennsylvania swimmer who had first competed as a man and then started taking drugs to suppress testosterone. It was allowed to switch to the women's team at Penn, and Leah Thomas won a championship race in 2022, the NCAA. There was also a case of a philosophy professor at University of Charleston, who formerly was Rachel McKinnon, who changed her name to Veronica Ivy and decided to compete in women's cycling events and won numerous awards. It caused a lot of controversy in philosophy as to whether she had a biological advantage. At the higher levels, there's also been controversy in the Olympics. There was a person named Caster Semenya from South Africa who evidently had undescended testes and high levels of testosterone. She was allowed to compete as a woman in the Olympics. There was also a woman in India, Duti Chan, who had very high levels of testosterone and was also allowed to compete. So this has created a lot of protest. There are parents in Maine opposing a very permissive law in Maine that allows biological men who are transitioning to compete in women's sports. Parents would like to have that banned. A person named Riley Gaines has emerged as a national spokesperson for those who don't want biological men to compete with women. But every issue in bioethics has a pedigree. And let's go back and see how this started. We really need to go back to the 1930s when there were some pioneering surgeons in Germany that started to allow some people to change from male to female. After the Nazis came in, they destroyed all the techniques and banned this kind of surgery. And it really kind of, when it died, it wasn't really until 1952 when the famous case of Christine Jorgensen kind of galvanized the world. Basically, if surgeons allowed a man to transition to a female, creating a vagina and so on, giving him estrogen for breast, this, over time, became more and more prominent, especially as we know at Hopkins, which with John Money became a kind of center for sexual reassignment surgery. The other case that really blew this kind of open was, it's one thing to transition from male to female. It's another to want to play in women's sports. And the really seminal case was 1977. And by all means, it was a physician, an ophthalmologist named Richard Richards, who became Renee Richards, who surgically and hormonally transitioned to a woman and wanted to play professional tennis against women as a woman and was allowed to do so. He famously played doubles in some famous matches. Interesting, much later in his life, he confessed that he did not think that people such as himself should be allowed to compete against women. So recently, and I'm recording this in July of 2026, about a week ago, the U.S. Supreme Court heard a case where two trans women appealed bans in Idaho and West Virginia. And the bans basically said that people born male could not compete in women's sports. And they claimed this was unfair. And the Supreme Court decided 6-3 that the state could, but did not impose such a ban. And about 26 states have those bans. Female athletes across the country applauded this decision. Judge Sonia Sotomayor was vigorously dissenting, and she said that when the facts are unclear about whether testosterone gives biological men an advantage, courts exercise judicial restraint. So what about this? I think that there's a big distinction as to whether puberty has occurred. If a male goes through puberty and testosterone influences him, he will have bigger muscles, bigger bones than women who are just getting estrogen. And all you have to do is look at some of the people like Leah Thomas, Renee Richards, or Veronica Ivy, and you can see that they have bigger bones and more muscles than the average woman. And so, yes, it certainly looks like they have an advantage. And when someone like Andraya Yearwood wins the state championship right off, that's a pretty clear sign that something is askew. By the way, Andraya is now a student at North Carolina Central University and no longer competing in sport. But Leah Thomas wants to compete still. This is not only about fairness, but it's also about the epistemology of fairness. If most people think it's obvious that biological men have an advantage and it's unfair to female athletes to compete against them, that's pretty good evidence. So one of the key problems here is that Congress originally only intended Title IX to create equality between biological men and biological females. It did not intend to talk about gay men and lesbians in sports. It was later interpreted by courts and administration to apply to gay men and gender, but this was not the original intention. And this intention, this interpretation, is nearly out of kilter with what most people think about sports and fairness. So I disagree with Sotomayor. I think if there's a case for judicial restraint, it's in judges, public officials reinterpreting what Congress intended for Title IX. And it's one of the things that makes people really mad about so-called experts telling them what's fair and what's not. I know a lot of parents who have females who participate in sports. I know they all seem to agree with this decision. I know it's controversial. It's certainly controversial in adolescent banks. Anyway, that's it for today. If you like this, give me a thumbs up. See you again next Tuesday.